Welcome everyone to tonight's event from the Freedom School Project. My name is Nikifa Bernard, and I am a Senior Program Director here at the Joseph C. Cornwall Center for Metropolitan Studies. I'd like to welcome you to today's Freedom School panel called 30 Years of Fostering Youth Leadership, an inside look at the Brotherhood Sister Sol's Rites of Passage program. Thank you all so much for being here. We'd first like to take a second to acknowledge the land that Rutgers University Newark sits on. We want to respectfully acknowledge the Munsee Lenape people who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We pay our respect to the elders of those tribal nations, both past and present. Land acknowledgement is a small yet important step towards elevating our consciousness about America's relationship with Native people and this land. We encourage you to explore this some more on your own. In the chat, you'll find a list of links and resources to help you on that journey. So what is the Freedom School Project? For those of you attending this series for the first time, welcome. A bit about our work. The Freedom School Project is an attempt to change the national conversation about education for the children of disenfranchised communities. We advocate re-engineering some schools in such communities based on the principles underlying Student Nonviolent Coordinating Communities, SNCC, Freedom Schools, and similar efforts. Schools that approach learning as affirming, elevating, rigorous, joyous, and transformative for self and for community. Before we invite our featured guest, Jason, to the mic, a word from our fearless leader, Charles M. Payne, Director of the Joseph C. Cornwall Center for Metropolitan Studies, and the Henry Rutgers Distinguished Professor of Africana Studies here at Rutgers University. Professor?
Thank you. You enjoyed making that introduction, didn't you?
I sure do.
I could see. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being here. I just want to say that I have really been looking forward to this for a long time, for many years, in a sense, since I have known about this work, I think close to 20 years. Probably visited first 20 some years ago. In any case, all I want to say is this is a particularly important discussion in my mind for those of us who are trying to reimagine what education can be in this country for the children who are always left out. This project, Brotherhood Sister Sol, is important. One, because of just sheer longevity. It's almost 30 years old. It started in 1944. It's important because of its scale. They work at any one time, and I'm sure Jason will give us some more precise figures, with hundreds of kids at one time. They just opened a new building, which everyone says is spectacular, 22,000 square feet. They have always, I believe, served both African-American and Latinx youth. They're important just because of the sheer intensity of the work that they are doing. Their Rites of Passage program works with young people over a period of anywhere from 4 to 6 years. Many of us have been connected to Rites of Passage programs, but not for 4 to 6 years for any individual kids. And one of the things that I have always respected and admired about Brotherhood Sisters Sol is that they raised issues of gender identity, male chauvinism long before that was fashionable to do. In fact, they're one of the very first groups that I know of to do that. And it's also important, I think, for everybody to realize that this large, robust program grew from a mustard seed, as the old folks used to say. It grew organically. It wasn't that they had some great plan. In the beginning, if I understand the history right, 2 young brothers wanted to do something. Then it just grows step by step. Every time they encounter a new need among the young folks they work with, they wind up adding a new element of programming. And so in a sense, it makes sense that this program is located in Harlem, which for many of us has at least at one time was the symbolic capital of America. Seems like the right place to house something as robust and long-running and long-lasting as this work has been. So this is just really a very inspiring story. And I'm going to give you back to Nikifa Garay to give our speaker an actual genuine introduction.
Thank you, Charles.
Sure.
It is my honor to introduce our dynamic and passionate speaker for tonight's event. Jason Warwin is the co-founder of the Brotherhood Sister Sol, also known as BroSis. He is an expert in the field of youth development and a specialist in the design of transformative programming, curriculum, and experiences. Jason leads programming and professional development efforts at BroSis and has trained educators across the country on the organization's unique pedagogy. Jason's focus during the last 30 years has been developing organizations and programs that directly support the development of Black and Latinx youth in the Americas. Jason has traveled extensively in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean for personal study and as an educational guide. For 7 years, from 2006 to 2013, Jason lived in Rio de Janeiro and Bahia, Brazil. There, he explored Afro-Brazilian culture, learned and implemented permaculture techniques, and was involved in a variety of community organizing and youth development efforts, including the establishment of a formal branch of the Brotherhood Sister Sol. Over the years, Jason has received numerous awards from public, private, philanthropic, educational, and nonprofit institutions. Jason has served on the board of directors of the New York Foundation, the Fund for Social Change, and of Educations for Social Responsibility. We are so excited to welcome Jason to the stage to talk to us about the work he's leading at BroSis. A portion of Jason's presentation will be interactive. So at one point, he will ask for volunteers from the audience to read a quote and offer a reflection. If you'd like to participate, please drop a note in the chat and we'll unmute you for this activity. And please don't be shy. We're all here to learn and talk and discuss together. And also, if you have any questions along the way, please place those questions in the chat or in the Q&A module option here in the Zoom webinar feature. Without any further ado, welcome and thank you, Jason, for being here.
Thank you, Nikifa, and thank you, Charles, for that warm introduction. I'm really excited to be here today to be able to talk to you about the work that we do at Brotherhood Sister Sol. It is an honor, and it is our pleasure, to be able to explain kind of what we do and why we do it. Today, I'm going to try to do three things. One, I was asked to give a little bit of background about myself, so talk a little bit about my upbringing and what brought me to this work. I want to give you a little bit about the history of BroSis and how we got started. And then ultimately a little bit about our Rites of Passage program and the programs that we run. So I'm going to try to do all that within a half an hour and leave enough time for any questions and for us to engage in some dialogue about the work that we do. I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation for you, and I am going to walk through that. Is everybody able to see my screen now? Yes. Great. So the Brotherhood Sister Sol is a social justice youth development organization. And essentially, we operate in three interconnected spheres. First and foremost, we educate young people. And I'm going to talk a bit about the various programs that we run. And Charles is correct. When we first started, we had one program. We were just the Brotherhood. We were just working with young men. But over the last 30 years, we've grown organically and expanded the work that we do. We organize. And so our young folks and our staff and our board collectively organize around issues that affect the young people that we serve, the families that we serve, the community that we serve. And I'll talk a little bit about that work. And then finally, we do training. And we organize educators and youth development workers and provide professional development around our pedagogical approach to youth development. So those are the three distinct buckets. Today, I'm going to really focus in on our educational work and a little bit about our organizing. First and foremost, this is Kara you see here and myself. As Charles mentioned, we started this organization when we were 22 years old. So we were seniors in college at the time. And my background in being an activist and to a certain degree being an educator actually started in high school. And I came from, and Kari also came from families that were deeply involved in the civil rights movement, to a certain degree in the power movements that came after that. My mother was an activist, the head of the community school board in District 4 in East Harlem. I grew up in a household where community organizing meetings were a normal thing after school that I saw and I experienced. So it was kind of in my blood that I would be doing something to try and uplift my community. But I really found my own passion based on my experiences. I grew up in New York City in the 80s and the early 90s, came of age during that time period. And, this is just a collage of some of the things that kind of influenced me as I was growing up. First and foremost, I believe that that time period was the golden age in hip hop. It was a time when, mainstream hip hop was very conscious and political. My favorite band, one of them was Public Enemy, KRS-One. These were artists who were rapping about the real issues that were going on in our communities. And that was kind of the theme music that was pushing me forward as I was in high school. It was also a time period where New York City had its first Black mayor, David Dinkins. And not only was he a Black man, but he was also an activist, a person who was trying to bring a sense of social justice to New York City at a time when it was really critical. It was the height of the crack epidemic. It was the height of the murder rate in New York City. In 91, when I was 17, going on 18 years old, over, I think it was 2,200 people were murdered in New York City, as compared to last year where you had about 500. So we had 4 times the murder rate, and that was related to the drug epidemic. But that was the reality that I was experiencing, seeing growing up in Harlem at that period in time. It was also the height of the AIDS epidemic, and all of the ignorance that was surrounding kind of awareness just about HIV and AIDS, but also around the support that was necessary for people who were dealing with it. And of course, it was Reagan in the presidency. And so thinking about, his policies and what he represented, all of that was going on in my upbringing as a teen. And I was fortunate at that time to have engaged in organizations that had a really powerful impact on me. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those. But one of the other instances that, really marked my teenage years was, the Central Park Five. And I actually went, Cory Booker, one of the Central Park Five, went to high school in my same building. I used to cross Central Park every day after school. I lived on the west side. I went to school on the east side. And, for those of you who don't know the story, essentially the police went through Central Park and rounded up all the young people after a Central Park jogger was murdered, and they forced confessions out of them. And none of them actually were guilty of the crime. But at that time, Donald Trump was a popular figure in the city, and he took out a full-page ad asking to bring back the death penalty. There were newspaper articles all over the place calling Black and Latinx young people, animals. I did feel at that point in time that I was public enemy number one, that, where I went as a young person, people would clutch their purse, people would follow me through supermarkets and stores. I had the first gun pointed at me when I was 15 years old, not, from somebody trying to rob me, but actually from a police officer, because I was walking through the Upper East Side with a group of friends, and he just didn't think we belonged in that neighborhood. So these were some of the experiences that marked me. But as I said, I went to a high school and I joined a couple of organizations that really helped to hone my understanding. And I also got that from my family of the legacy of struggle. So I looked at my experience, not just as my own experience, but as the experience of people of African descent in the Americas. The Encampment for Citizenship still exists, an incredible organization. I spent 6 weeks one summer after my junior year, after my sophomore year in California with 30 young people from across the country. And we studied the history of social justice movements. We engaged in activism, and it really sparked my desire to try to be a part of change making. And I came home to New York City after that experience out in the Bay, and really eager to join organizations and to begin organizing young people. The following summer, I joined an organization called the International Youth Leadership Institute, and Dr. Susan Wilcox who's affiliated with the Freedom School Project, was one of the directors of that organization, a mentor of mine. And I traveled to Egypt my summer after my junior year. And you can only imagine what that did for me to travel throughout Egypt for a month, to travel up and down the Nile, to climb inside the pyramids, to walk in the Valley of the Kings, and to see all of this amazing history that was created by Africans. The level of pride that instilled in me, the awareness, coming back home, and bringing that knowledge with me. And the following summer, I was able to participate in this program again, and we went to Senegal. And there I was able to go to Gorée Island and experience the slave mansions that were there, and to see the door of no return and the history and the legacy of the enslavement of my people. So both of these international experiences also, were a major part of my development. And I became an activist as a young person, and I was active in the struggle against the apartheid movement. I was active in the struggle against police brutality, and very much active in the protests against the first Gulf War back in the early 90s. And so I went off to college. I got accepted to Brown University and went off with a red, black, and green flag on top of my car, basically ready to go and gain as much knowledge as I could and figure out how I bring that back home. I had found my passion already, and I knew I just needed to figure out how to guide it. And at Brown is where we actually started doing some of this work. I had been working in the cafeteria at the Brown University, in the Brown University cafeteria. That was my college work study job. And I discovered that the same money that was paying me from the federal government to work in the cafeteria could pay me to work in the community. And I got a job working at a community center on the south side of Providence. And it was there that the director actually charged me with the challenge of creating a program for the boys who were hanging out behind in the parking lot, playing basketball in the parking lot, but they wouldn't come into the community center. And they were actually out there hustling, selling weed and other things. And if I could create a program that was going to reach those young men, I could have a job there. And that's where the idea of the Brotherhood really got started. I went to high school, as I said, in East Harlem. I had friends who were hustling. And one of the things I knew from a young age was that obviously there was an appeal there, right? Because you can make money and the status that you got, but it also was a feeling like you didn't have other choices. You didn't have other options and opportunities. And these young men who were friends of mine were just like every other kid who I knew growing up. So that was the initial design, was to work with that population. And my thesis in college, and this is actually a copy of my thesis cover, was Black Liberation, Continuing the Legacy of Struggle, right? This is the paper that I wrote at the end of my 4 years. And it was an analysis of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, founded by Marcus Garvey, the Organization of African American Unity, founded by Malcolm, and the Black Panther Party, obviously Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, and looking at the interconnections between these organizations, their missions, and thinking about me as a young person coming of age, how was I going to carry that torch forward? What was it that I was going to do to make my mark to uplift community moving forward? And one of the things I learned from my studies of the Panthers was that you had to serve the people. And that was also part of my passion, was working with young people. And so combining this effort of working with young people and thinking about creating change, this idea that if you serve the people, then the people will be willing to organize with you. They'll see where your heart is at. They'll see where your focus is, and they will be willing to work with you towards other forms of change. And so that's kind of the ideology we had behind starting the organization. And one of the first things we did back in '95, when we got incorporated in New York City, so I graduated from Brown. I worked with some other students who took over the program and ran it in Providence, Rhode Island when I graduated. And Kari and myself came home to New York City, and we incorporated here and established an organization called the Brotherhood. And actually, Susan Wilcox was the first chair of our board of directors. And this is the mission statement. And I just want to read part of it to you because I think it speaks to the work that we do. So the Brotherhood has been created to address the dire need for supportive programs for Black and Latino youth who are surrounded by the poverty, drugs, violence, racism, and miseducation which plague America's cities. The Brotherhood provides these youth with the support, guidance, knowledge, and resources necessary in order to understand and overcome these negative pressures, as well as the skills to combat them, right? So just that first paragraph was really about, yes, we want to help them develop an understanding of the issues, understand and become aware of them. We want them to overcome the pressures and the obstacles that are in their lives, but then we also want them to become activist organizers who combat and deal with those issues so that they no longer exist in our communities. That was our ideology from the start, working with young people, but the mission here is about helping them develop to the point where they can become members of the struggle for justice within our communities. And I'll just read the second paragraph. The Brotherhood is not simply an organization, it is more accurately a way of life, providing youth with an opportunity to explore their ideas, identity, and future amongst peers with the support and guidance of their immediate elders is a natural method of promoting positive development into adulthood. As I said, when I started this organization, I was 22. And one of the things that I was seeing at that point in my life was that there was a big gulf between the kids coming up, the teenagers coming up, and the older adults at that time. And that what we needed was a bridge. And so this organization, started by two 22-year-olds, was about, I was just in your seats, 3 years ago. I come from the same community, I come from the same background, same experience. I've gained some knowledge now, and I can be that bridge. But the other piece of that is that it's not just an organization, that this was more a way of life. This was a labor of love. When we first started, we had no money. So I went back home to live with my parents. Kari went back home to live with his parents. We didn't have any funding for this program. We got it started in my old high school in East Harlem. I had a teacher of mine who started another school on the Lower East Side. That's how we started the Brotherhood, with 2 chapters. And then little by little, we started to raise money. But in those early years, we didn't even have a salary, really. But we were committed, we had a vision, we had passion, and we weren't going to be stopped. And we got together a great board of directors that helped us to really legitimize our work. And over the years, we expanded. And so even from the beginning, when we first incorporated, if you look at the list of objectives, one of them was to eventually have our own community center. And, great, we have that now. And another was that we were going to always plan to work with young women as well. We weren't just wanting to focus on boys, but we were both young men, and that made the most sense at the time. And so eventually, after our 3rd year of working only exclusively with boys, Dr. Susan Wilcox stepped down from the board and became the 3rd director of the organization and established Sister Sol, which was the young women's component of our organization. And so over the years, as Charles mentioned, we've expanded organically. We bought a brownstone in Harlem, and next door to it, there was a community garden that had been there for years. One of the staff, alumni of our organization, was a gardener from the Lower East Side. And so he started working with kids there, and that became our environmental program. From the outset, we knew we wanted to work with young folks around bringing them into the world of organizing and activism. And not all the kids who were in the Brotherhood or in Sister Sol in our Rites of Passage program, not all of them wanted to be activists and organizers. So we created a separate program called the Liberation Program so that we could really focus in on those kids who wanted to be the tip of the spear, so to speak, the vanguard of the organizers within our organization. We never worked with elementary school age kids, but there were a whole lot of kids, little kids who lived on the block, who started knocking on our door and said, hey, what about us? And so because of that, we ended up creating an after school program for, young kids, ages 8 through 12, elementary school. So that's been the way that we've grown kind of over the years, responding to the needs in our community, as we've been able to raise additional funds and hire additional staff. We now have approximately 600, a little under 600 young people that we work with year round. We have 47 staff, full-time staff, who are part of the organization. In terms of our programmatic team, full-time staff, the majority of them are alumni of the organization. So young folks who came up through the program, went off, got their education, worked some other places, came back, and are now running programming here. So I'm going to walk through these programs really briefly. And I want to spend more of the time kind of getting into the Rites of Passage program. So I won't cover that right now. I'm going to come back to that. So as I said, our Liberation Program operates year round. This program is where we train young people to be organizers and activists. We have an intensive 6-week summer program that they're engaged in, where they learn about the history of social justice movements, where they meet with organizers, and where they develop the skills to be activists and organizers themselves. And during the school year, we actually hire them and they organize around the campaign of their choice. And as I mentioned, currently they're working on a campaign to try to increase the number of social workers and guidance counselors and the mental health supports for young people within our school system. And that's the major campaign that they're working on. I talked about our environmental program. Within that program, our young people manage a 6,000 square foot community garden that's adjacent to our building. They grow over 30 different kinds of fruits and vegetables within that garden. They manage a weekly farmers market where they get fresh produce from local farmers. They learn about how to run a small business, but they also provide healthy food to our community at wholesale prices, essentially. They have a greenhouse where they've built the largest aquaponic system in Harlem. So they're learning about ways to do urban farming, right? How do you grow food within an urban environments? Another program is our after school program. This operates 5 days a week. Young folks are engaged in a variety of different activities, ranging from dance classes to theater, to filmmaking, to music making. The staff of that program are all professional performing artists, many of whom have come out of our organization and are poets, or who are writers like Elizabeth Acevedo, who are operating outside and performing in their own ways, but then also teaching artists coming in and sharing those skill sets with young folks. Our summer leadership program is really a conglomeration of various programs. So when kids are out of school, we go into hyperdrive. So over the summer, we have about 350 young people who are in programming here at our headquarters. And we have a variety of different courses that we offer, from workforce development to the music making to theater and dance. And one of our flagship programs is our international study program. So as I mentioned, I was a part of an organization that took me to Africa when I was a young person. And when I established this organization, like we all do, I said, what are the things that in my own life, helped me, supported me, and I want to incorporate those into the work that we do. And so the international study program that we operate is based on the model from the International Youth Leadership Institute. Our kids study essentially from January through June. They're studying about the country we're going to visit. We have a group right now that's been meeting since January that's studying about the history of Ghana and the culture of Ghana and the politics of Ghana. And then for the full month of July, 4 weeks, they'll be traveling throughout Ghana, in Accra, in Usuta, in Kumasi, in Cape Coast, and they'll be engaging with politicians, engaging with youth organizations, staying in major cities, small villages, and really learning about that cultural history that is Ghana today. One of our life-changing programs, many of the kids are part of that program. It's the first time getting a passport. It's the first time on a plane. It's the first time leaving their family for a month. So you can imagine the impact that it has on them. And we've traveled, throughout Africa and Latin America. In Africa, we've traveled to South Africa, to Ghana, to Senegal, to Egypt. In the Americas, we've gone to Cuba, to Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Brazil. So it's one of the things we've done every year, essentially since 1996. And there were a couple of years we had to stop due to COVID, but it's also one of our primary programs. Lastly, one of our newest expansions is our college career and wellness program. And so over the course of the year, we're always providing support for young people to think about what their futures entail. And our ultimate goal in this organization is to help young people define and decide what it is you want to do with your life, and then provide you with a wealth of support and guidance and love to get there. And the College Career and Wellness team are a group of staff who are focused on doing that for all age groups within our organization. So we have a college coordinator who starts with kids as young as 8 years old and helping them think about college in age appropriate ways. And we know that, within our community, it's, I think, about 73% of the kids are the first in their families to go off to college. So there's a lot we do to help them begin to think about college as a part of their future. But we know that not all of our kids will want to go to college, and that's not always the best option for everyone. So we have a career coordinator also who's helping young people to think about what kind of career you're interested in, helping them build their resumes, helping them get internships and opportunities throughout high school, helping them get that first job when they're out of college, helping them find summer jobs in between. So that career piece has really been worked out for all age groups as well. And then finally, wellness. We have 2 clinical social workers on staff who provide a wide variety of therapeutic support for our members. And that's individual counseling, but that's also group counseling, and that's also organization-wide wellness activities. We know that there is, and there has always been a crisis within our community, and especially amongst young people, of depression. And it's a reality of being an oppressed people, right? You can't have oppressed people without some form of depression. And it's something that we've been talking about for 30 years. Now, because of COVID, everyone's recognized that, including the Surgeon General, and saying there's a crisis of, anxiety and depression within young people. But this is something we've been seeing, all along, and it's only been increased, obviously, by the current realities. So with all the work we do, these are some of the statistics. 94% of our kids graduate from high school, 86% go on to college, less than 2% become pregnant, male or female, before the age of 22. Less than 1% of any of our members over the course of this 30-year period have been incarcerated, and 95% of our alumni are either in school or working full-time. These are some of the statistics we share, evidence-based programming, but to me, the real beauty of our organization and the real testament is not necessarily these statistics, but the kinds of young people who actually graduate from our organization. Where is their mind state? What kind of people are they? How are they committed to their communities? For me, it is not a success if a young person gets into college, but they're sexist or homophobic, right? Like, if you haven't understood the tenets that we are trying to instill within you, then it doesn't really matter how successful you are, you can still be a part of the problem. So our organization and all the programs we run are centered around these 12 curricular focus issues. And we've had 10 of these focus issues since day one. We constantly go back to them and adjust them every few years. But you can see the list there. I won't read them. But all of our curriculum is based around these tenets. And so we have our mission statement, which I read to you, which is adapted over the years, but same sentiments that lead to our focus issues, that then lead to the curriculum, the workshops, the programming that we do with all of our young people and all of our different programs. When we talk about outcomes, the goals that we have for the young people who participate in our program, there's a list of 15 of them here. Again, I won't read all these to you, but you can see some of the ideals: that they develop a personal testimony of their values, beliefs, and goals, that they develop into critical thinkers, that they find their creative voice, that they increase their involvement in travel, that they learn basic skills for survival and success. Through our programming, through our curriculum, through the multi-year involvement that we have with young people, we expect that these outcomes, if not all of them, many of them will be met with the young people that we work with. So now I've come to the part where hopefully some people will be willing to volunteer to read and to participate. I want to go through with you kind of the pillars of our pedagogy. And so this is really just looking at what are the essential components that make BroSis work. And so I don't know if there are volunteers, but if there are, then I would like someone to read this quote and just give your brief reflection on what this means to you, this quote here.
And I'd just like to add, if you want to volunteer to read the quote, you feel free to raise your hand.
And if you have not, Ahmed, you spoke up, so you got to read this first one there.
And can I say this? After Ahmad, I'm going to ask if folks don't mind. Awo, Howard, Larry, Robin, I think that may be enough, but if you guys don't mind, we're gonna call on you next. Go ahead, Ahmad, I'm sorry.
All right, no problem. The pedagogy of the oppressed, which is the pedagogy of people engaged in the fight for their own liberation, has its roots here. The oppressed must be their own example in the struggle for their redemption.
And when you read that, what does that bring to mind? Any reflection on that quote?
This is a good one. What comes to mind?
We can't hear you. Uh-oh.
No, I was reading it back in my mind.
Oh, okay, I saw your lips moving.
Yeah, I think it just speaks to following not following what has worked previously throughout history for oppressed individuals, and just ensuring that we're able to look at others for essentially ways to fight for our own liberation, and that this is not starting with you. There are people in the past who have fought for their own liberation in various countries, because of various and in various events. So just ensuring that we are able to utilize those examples, and then be our own examples, and fighting for our own liberation.
Thank you. Yeah, Paulo Freire is one of the people who we utilize often when we're doing our trainings. And he was an educator in Brazil who worked with marginalized and oppressed peoples and really helped them to develop their ability to fight back and to think about their oppression within the context of the society that they lived in. And I always, when I read this, I'm also thinking often at times it resonates with me of things that I heard Malcolm say around self-determination, right? That yes, we look at our history and our ancestors, but we don't necessarily look to other people. We look to ourselves to figure out how it is that we're going to resolve our problems. And to me, this kind of relates to some of our work around intentional community. That this is one of the essential pieces of what we do at BroSis, is that we create intentional communities. So every one of our programs, whether it's a brotherhood or a sisterhood or an environmental program or a liberation program, each of these is a group of young people who have come together and who we expect will define for themselves their beliefs. And so that's one of the essential components of self-determination, right? That they choose a name for themselves, that they create their own mission statement. It's one of the secret sauces of what we do, that we don't come in and tell young people, this is what it means to be a man, or this is what it means to be a sister. We have them define it for themselves, and then we hold them accountable to their own words. We also create what we consider to be safe spaces, where young people feel comfortable talking about the issues that are going on in their lives. But they are also brave spaces, right? Where, sometimes there's a contradiction in people's mind about that, because if you are going to speak your truth, sometimes you have to be brave, and it may not always feel safe. But there are also sacred spaces. And so we do a lot in terms of rites of passage and having ceremonies, and I'll talk to you about that as well. We also have what we consider a family culture, meaning that once you become a part of our organization, you become a part of our family. And that means that any issue that's going on in your life, we're going to be there for you. It means that we're going to work with you long term, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what that looks like as well. It also means that we practice restorative justice. So we don't get rid of kids if they make mistakes, if they harm people in our community, if they do something wrong outside of our community. We really offer them opportunities to redeem themselves and to heal the harms that have been caused. So that's another critical component of our work. I'm going to read this one, and I think what I'll do is it might be easier if I just ask if there's anybody who wants to comment on it, as opposed to just read it. So I'll read it. It says, "To educate as the practice of freedom is a way of teaching that anyone can learn. That learning process comes easiest to those of us who teach, who also believe that there is an aspect of our vocation that is sacred. who believe that our work is not merely to share information, but to share in the intellectual and spiritual growth of our students, to teach in a manner that respects and cares for the souls of our students is essential if we are to provide the necessary conditions where learning can most deeply and intimately begin. And that's from Sister Bell Hooks. Anybody have any reflection on that particular quote? I see Robin Ince has raised her hand. Can we?
Hi, yes, thank you. Hi, Jason.
Hi.
Hi. I think about sort of the activist and people in movements across time that have first started with believing that anyone can learn. And part of the challenge, I think, with some of the education, the way it's practiced now in the traditional form, is that we wait for a test to tell us the capacity of people to learn. But, education, as it says, the vocation is sacred. I believe it's a calling, and that you have to be in the work with a servant's heart, knowing that you're only finished. Well, you're never finished with the work, because it's not for us to say whether or not someone has reached their place of promise. That's something that is given to them by God's grace. And we're here to help shepherd them toward that. And as we shepherd them toward that, the teacher learns from the student so that the teacher can be even better and more learned for the next set of students that come. So this is kind of an iterative process.
Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, what I wish we had more time was to actually dig into each of these quotes and hear more people. I saw a couple of their hands raised, but at the end, we'll have a Q&A. And so please take any notes, folks, and we can come back to conversating around any aspect of the presentation, but definitely appreciate the comments and the reflections that you shared. I'll just say for us, a couple of things that this makes me think about is the holistic support that as an educator, as a teacher, even in the schools, at times we're just thinking about reading, or they are just thinking about reading, writing, and like just getting these facts, the kind of banking method of education, as you pointed out, pouring stuff into kids as opposed to thinking about them as whole people. And holistic support is really a core component of what we do. So all of our programmatic staff are on 24/7 call. That means that they have a cell phone number, they give it out to all their members, and their members know there is an adult, there are two adults, because every program we run has at least two adults with it, who are there for them and who will respond to any issue in their life 24/7. So if they are afraid to leave school because they think they're going to get jumped, they know they can call on a staff person. If there's a problem at home and they need somebody to talk to, there's a staff person they can call. Whatever the issue, they know that that's a resource and a support that they have. And that it's 365 days, all year round, for the length of the term that you are participating in our organization, which is, as I said, from the age of 8 through 22. So it's a long-term program with the recognition that young people need stabilizing support in their lives over the course of their adolescent development. There is support around various issues. So we have a law firm that's on retainer that will provide support with any kind of legal issues. So that could be criminal legal issues, that could be housing, that could be family court. I mentioned that we have mental health supports on staff, but when our staff are at capacity, we also connect young people to health resources throughout the city. If there's financial needs, we have a pool of money, an emergency fund. We give out, anywhere from, I'd say, about $5,000 a month to families to support, and it depends, it ranges from month to month. And then we also have scholarship funding as well, so supporting young people who are in college and need support financially in that area. And then, of course, academic supports, tutoring, interventions in schools, all of that is what we provide. And all of that's done through individualized case management, so young person by young person. Unconditional love, like we use the word love in our organization. As I said, it's a family environment. So we want young people to know that this is not just an institution, this is not just a job, this is a community, a loving community that you are entering in. And what we are trying to show young people is that there is a different way, right? That unfortunately we live in a society that has shown that if you don't have money, you are second class. And what we're trying to show is that there is a different way, or if your skin looks a different color, you are second class. But there is a different way of being. And I think that's one of the inspirational aspects of our work. And that we have a full organization between our staff, our board who's very active. We've got lobbyists, consultants, who are all working together to provide support for the young people who are part of our organization. Okay, next quote. The victim who is able to articulate the situation of the victim has ceased to be a victim. He or she has become a threat. James Baldwin. Any reflections on that quote?
See Larry Leverett.
You asked for reflections on the quote, and I would just like to express my sense of deep gratitude to the staff and board and community and consultants and all the people who have utilized the framework that that works, that has history, that reflects the principles of Sankofa, and that in our historical past, we have organized ourselves to overcome tremendous obstacles placed in our way, no matter which side of the Atlantic or the Pacific we find ourselves. We have evidence in our history of being able to care for our families, to set the values and reinforce the values that we determine are important for our kids and our families to model and embrace as they develop from children into adulthood. So much appreciation to all of you, and it must be so wonderful to be involved in this blessed work. We need to stop being victims, right? We need to take control. We need to draw on our past. We need to use the knowledge of our forebearers, our forefathers, and our foremothers as we think about the issues and challenges that confront us today. And we need to just stop being victims and stand up and take the fight to the system. I mean, great debate going on around things like CRT. They dummied down CRT just to have a sexy, easy symbol that the ignorant and oppressors can use as a dog whistle. Just 3 little letters to signal everything about the hatred of our community and the persistence of the systems that oppress us. We need to just stop being oppressed and start fighting the battle and organizing the way you all have done, because it takes 30 years to get to where you are.
Yeah, Larry, I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off. I wanted to engage more in conversation at the end, but I do want to get through the presentation right now. So any last thoughts you have before we move on to the next one?
Move on.
Okay, thank you, Larry. I'm sorry to cut you.
No, I'm thankful for you, bro.
All right. And I agree with everything that you said. And in terms of this quote, to me, it's always just a real powerful one, in the sense of, this is what we do with young people, is that we help them to understand and understand and articulate their situation and now their threats to the system and the way that it exists. Sorry, let me go to the next slide. So to me, this is about liberation education, right? So I talked about the 12 focus issues. One of the primary goals that we've always had at this organization is that all our young people develop knowledge of self, right? And when you think about culturally relevant education, essentially that's what it is. It's knowledge of self. And we've been doing that for 30 years before CRE was even a term that people were using regularly. But I agree with you that it's become a catch-all phrase. It doesn't really mean much at this point in time. But for us, what it means is that young people are learning about the history that affected their lives. They're learning about their own culture. They're learning about their background, and they're learning about the issues that affect their lives and how they can address those issues. We have a model that's called content, perspective, dialogue, and reflection. And that's part of our educational tool. And if I was doing a deeper workshop, I'd get into what that is, but essentially using very rich content, which can be a video, it can be an essay, it can be a newspaper article, it can be a picture, and using that as a way to help young people to develop their perspective and engage in dialogue, and then reflect. And through that process is how we help to develop critical thinking amongst our young folks. Somebody mentioned this earlier, the educator as facilitator, right? That process is reciprocal, right? I have a lot of information I want to share with you, but you've got a lot of lived experience and education as well that you need to share with me. And we're both learning through this process. And then a youth organizing model, that it's not just about the exchange of information, but it's about what do you do with that information now that you have it. If you're learning about the history of social justice, if you're learning about current problems that exist in our world, then what are you doing with that information and how are you trying to address and interact with it? I want to run through this because we don't have a lot of time, and I want to make sure we get to the open conversation. There's a few more things I want to get through. Strong people don't need strong leaders. Ella Baker is one of my favorites. Anyone have a quick response to this one? I'll see if there's any hands to come up. And if not, that's okay. I'll just jump into what it means to me. Essentially, when I think about this quote, I think about what does it mean to be a leader? And from day one in this organization, we've always had young people, when they were in the brotherhood, they had to define for themselves, what does it mean to be a brother? What does it mean to be a man? And what does it mean to be a leader? And these were all ideals that, young men, we said, you're going to become a man one day. You're a brother in this program, but you also should see yourself as a leader. And I think we oftentimes have a very narrow definition of what it means to be a leader, the head of an organization, the head of a movement, the person in the spotlight. But what we really feel like is that everybody should see themselves as a leader. Every young person in this organization should be able to think for themselves, should be able to guide their own lives, should be a role model for other people. And that's what really, leadership is about. You're not following other people. You're defining for yourself what you believe in. And sure, if somebody's doing something good, you can be right alongside them or be in their movement, but you're not sheep. You are actually making your own decisions. So that concept that, youth leadership for us is everyone can be a leader. You define your beliefs, you develop a moral code. Within our organization, most adults have never sat down and put pen to paper and said, this is what I believe in, and this is what I'm going to live by. And I'm going to keep coming back to this month after month, year after year, and making sure that I live by it. And I'm going to have a group of people that are going to hold me accountable to supporting and to living up to the ideals that now I've set for myself. But that's what we do within the organization. So helping young people to find their voice, define it, put it on paper, develop the critical thinking skills, and really move along this spectrum, right? From awareness, where you begin to understand what the issues are, analysis, right? Where you're now analyzing, well, how do these issues affect my life and how can I interject and what are the ways in which I can make change? And then you're taking action, right? And you're actually practicing ways and trying to create change. And that process is a reciprocal kind of process. And lastly, that teaching is a form of mastery. That's in our concept of youth leadership. So generally within all of our programming, as you grow in the organization, you are then responsible for teaching your peers, right? So either leading a workshop, facilitating a community service project, whatever it is, you have to somehow take what it is that you've learned and now use that to teach somebody else. And I've always learned that that's the best form of mastery. If you can teach something to somebody else, then it shows that you've actually mastered it. So that's one of the principles of our youth leadership work. Lastly, to end with Audre Lorde, for to survive in the mouth of this dragon we call America, we have had to learn this first and most vital lesson, that we were never meant to survive. And again, unless somebody raises their hand real quick, I will just say, oh, Robin got there. All right, let's see. Robin?
Sorry, I just wanted to say absolutely. If people don't understand the nature of what they're dealing with, they're going to believe the narrative that their situation in life is their fault. Their inability to achieve is their fault. Their inability to get out, quote unquote, of the ghetto is their fault. But if you understand the truth of what you're dealing with, and then you're given the tools and the depth of knowledge to understand that, then you can navigate anything. But yes.
Yeah, I think, you know, to me, ditto everything you said. And going back to the other brother's comments also about, you know, CRE, to me, culturally relevant education or liberation education is about this, that we need young people to understand this history and this reality. And from that painful reality, that painful history, will begin to help one understand the circumstances, and then with care and support, get to the point where they can overcome and then hopefully try to create change, right? And what we see happening a lot with the young people is that there's a period of anger, right? I think we all, as people of color, oppressed folks, well, we go through at some point in our life a lot of anger because of the reality that we understand. But hopefully, if you have the right support and guidance, you figure out ways to channel that in positive directions. And that's what our work is all about. I'll just say this, you know, the last thing about our programming, that, you know, we have no barriers. And what that means is we don't cream, you know, you don't have to have a certain grade point average. There are no fees to join it. Everything we do is free or in a sliding scale. Even our trips to Africa, you know, it costs us over $5,000 per child. We pay for the flight, we pay for the hotels, we pay for the ground transportation, we pay for the food, we'll pay for your passport, we'll pay for your vaccination shots, you know, and we ask for a small donation of $500 if families can afford it. If they can't afford it, then, you know, you don't pay anything to go on these trips. And that goes for all of our different programs, but that's the obvious one that is most outstanding in that regard in terms of cost. That we have a focus on the most underserved, you know, that we are also, you know, when we partner with schools, I get calls all the time that private schools want us to partner with them, or sometimes schools that are academically, I'll say privileged because they screen and they only let certain kids into the programming. You know, we focus our attention and our resources on underserved communities and young people who don't have all the supports or most of the supports that others do have. The last thing that I want to do, and I'm going to have to rush this now a little bit, is just to give you a sense of what our Rites of Passage program looks like. And we have partner schools throughout New York City, but primarily in the greater Harlem community. So by greater Harlem, if you know New York, there's Central, there's East and West Harlem, there's Washington Heights, there's the South Bronx. That's all considered kind of the greater Harlem community, and that's where our partner schools are. But we also have done trainings and have partners in Boston, Massachusetts. There's a nonprofit up there called Young Man with a Plan that works with 8 schools that is based on our model where we did training. We also have a partnership currently with the DC public school system. I think there are 7 schools in the DC public school system that are now utilizing our model. I'm going out in 2 weeks to San Francisco to partner with a collaboration of community organizations out there. When I lived in Brazil, we started a branch down there. We started a branch in Bermuda. So, we're doing support around our Rites of Passage program in lots of places. The pictures you see here are on retreats, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but getting city kids out of the city up into, we rent out like a YMCA camp. So they get to do the hiking and the canoeing and the campfires and laying out and looking at the stars at night. And it's an opportunity to be in sisterhood or in brotherhood, in the beauty of nature, which we know is extremely powerful for young people as an experience. So our Rites of Passage program, I'm going to give this to you as quickly as I can, has 4 basic phases. And those phases, it depend on whether we're partnering with a high school or a secondary school. So if it's a high school, it will start with kids in the 9th grade and stay with them all the way through senior year graduation. If it's a secondary school, then we'll start in the 7th grade and we'll stay all the way through 12th, right? If it's a secondary school that has both middle and high together, which is our ideal because we like to start with kids younger. So each of these phases could be considered a year, but it also doesn't always flow like that. So as you're thinking about the phases, just think of them as periods of time that we work with young folks. The other thing I want to point out is that once kids graduate from high school, we offer an additional 4 years of support as they go into college. As I mentioned before, the majority of our kids are first in their families to go to college, so they need support. A lot of them going to predominantly white institutions where they have very little supports, and it's not like back home. So they need the emotional and social support, they need the financial support, and then also the guidance during their summers and when they graduate on, how do I get started in my career? So back to the Rites of Passage program, the first phase is always bonding and community building. So in that first year, that first phase of the program, it's really about bringing together a group of young people, if it's a group of young boys or a group of young girls, and helping to create that safe space. How do we create a real sense of brotherhood or sisterhood within this group? And over the course of a school year, you have about 36 sessions, 36 weeks. And so every week we're coming in, we're meeting with the group. And the first thing we always do when we sit down with a group of kids is we have what we call a check-in. And that's where everybody goes around the room. It'll be 15 to 20 young people, 2 adult staff. And it's just checking in about your week. What's been going on? How you doing? And in the first beginning year, sometimes it's very simple. So, I went to see this movie. I hung out with my friends. I was playing video games, etc. But after you do that check-in week after week, year after year, that space becomes one of the most sacred and important spaces in all your life. And a lot of our kids talk about that having a safe space where you can open up and talk with your peers, take off that mask that you have to wear every day when you're walking through the hood, and really open up and share your feelings is a therapeutic thing in and of itself. And so forming that bond and creating that sense of brotherhood and sisterhood is the most crucial activity we do in that first year. Over the course of that time, we have 2 of these wilderness retreats. So we'll do one in the fall, so right when the school year starts, another one in the spring. And those retreats are where we bring together all of our different groups. So all the brotherhood groups will go on a retreat together for 3 days up to the wilderness, or all the sisterhood groups. So it'll be, could be up to 70, 80 kids all going over, and we take over, as I said, a YMCA camp for the weekend. The challenge in every phase of this program has a challenge. The challenge in the first year is for that group to form a name. They choose a name for themselves. So we have like the Eternally Unbreakable chapter, or the Invincible chapter, or the Acoma chapter. They choose a name that represents them, and they create a mission statement together, a collective statement to the world about who they are as a group. And they also create definitions. If it's a brotherhood, they create, as I said, a definition of what it means to be a man brother leader. If it's a sisterhood, they create a definition of what it means to be a woman sister leader. And you can see a couple examples here. So this is the Eternally Unbreakable chapter, their mission statement, their definitions. And that's the Soul Emoja chapter, Soul standing for Sisters of Unconditional Love, and their mission statement. And so every group that we create in a different school or in a different city goes through this process of creating their name, creating their mission statement, and creating their definitions. And once they do that, there is a ceremony where they get their first shirt within the organization. And now they are officially a chapter. They've officially become a part of our world of brotherhood and sisterhood chapters. And that's the first part of their Rites of Passage program. The second phase, which often starts in the second year, or it could be, down the road, is what we call critical thinking, global awareness, and knowledge of self. So now we formed a bond, we have a chapter that's functioning, and now we're getting into deeper work. Now, the kids can handle deeper workshops, right? They've committed, they've bought in, they are now a part of this, and they're wearing their shirts with pride. In that second year, and you can see in bold how I've added a new thing that we add to the experience, is the member self-assessment. And so now they take their definitions of what it means to be a brother, man, and a leader, or what it means to be a sister, woman, and they assess themselves based on their own definition. So if a brother always looks out for their brothers, the question is, do you look out for your brothers all the time? Sometimes, not at all. If it says a sister doesn't lie to her sisters, do you lie to your sisters? Sometimes, not at all, always. And so it's an opportunity for you to assess yourself, and then to have a one-on-one session with the staff around, are you living up to the ideals that you've set for yourselves? We have now created, the whole ideology here is that we've created a mission together, objectives together that we're all striving to live up to. And so we have to hold each other accountable. And that's one of the most important aspects of the work that we do, is helping young people to define what they believe in and then live by their word. Because we live in a society, as we know, that's full of hypocrites, right? From the president at times on down, who say one thing and do another. And so ideally, what we are trying to do with this younger generation, and with all of us, including us, is to say that's not okay. That we have to define what we believe in, we have to live by our words, and we have to support each other in doing that, because we all make mistakes, we all fall down at times, but how are we, and that's what the importance of a brotherhood or a sisterhood is. When we fall off track, there's somebody there to say, hey, wait a second, you said this, and let's move. I also want to say that one of the chapter activities we do every year are the college tours. And so, the first year, that'll probably be a college tour just in New York City, right? There's dozens and dozens of schools that you can visit right here. But in the second and third year, those are 3-day trips out of New York State. So we will go as far north as Boston, and we might visit Wesleyan in Connecticut, and then visit Brown in Rhode Island, and then visit Boston College up in Massachusetts, right? On a 3-day trip, and expose them to these different campuses. If we have alumni in those schools, those alumni are showing them their dorm room and taking them to the gym and the cafeteria. And so they're seeing that there's this whole other aspect of college life that oftentimes kids whose families haven't been a part of college don't know. They think college is just more school, but they don't realize that there's all these other social aspects of college that are just as important as the actual academic, if not sometimes more important than the academic experience. So they're seeing that. And the same thing if we're going further south. So you can imagine by the time they graduate from high school now, they've visited a dozen schools, right? So now college is a part of their vision and what they want to do, and they can perhaps see themselves there. The third phase of the program, and I should say the challenge in the second phase, is the Warrior Weekend, which essentially is a weekend here in New York City, where the chapter leaders, the staff, develop a whole series of challenges for the kids. And they have to accomplish all these challenges by working together as a team. And they get some kind of a wristband that the staff, like one of these, that the staff will design particularly for that weekend with some quote on it and something that they're aspiring to achieve. The third phase is what we call Oath of Dedication. And I'm gonna stop really soon. I got 2 more minutes to try, and then we'll open it up for conversation, which is where the young people create their own individual oath. And this is a really powerful part of the program, where the mission statement and the definitions are a collective statement, right? That we as a group all are upholding and working towards this particular goal. In the third phase, they have to write their own individual oath. And this is their testimony individually to the world of who they are, what they want to achieve, what their goals are. It's a really profound experience, hard to do, but one that is extremely empowering, because at the end, when they share that with their community and they get it framed and they put it up on their wall, it's a testimony to who they are. It's the kind of document where anybody should read it, even more so than a bio, right? A bio just says, what are some of the things you've accomplished in your life? An oath talks about what do you want to do and what are you committing yourself to? And that's the challenge for that third phase, is for them to write that oath. And we have a ceremony where they read their oaths and they get another shirt. And during that third phase, they also begin to do peer education workshops. So now every week when the staff are coming, it's not always just the staff facilitating workshops, but now we break them into small groups and the members themselves are facilitating workshops for each other. And then the last phase is what we call a lifetime commitment, right? That you've now been in this program for 3 to 6 years, you're about to graduate. What we want young people who are stepping off to know is that this wasn't just a high school experience, that you've now got a brotherhood, a sisterhood that you can be a part of for the rest of your life. And these ideals that you've set for yourself can also follow you for the rest of your life. And so this is something that we have seen, and one of the most beautiful aspects of our work. I mentioned that over half our staff are programmatic staff, and even some of our operations team and other parts of our staff, our alumni, is that they tend to stay together, that the bond is real, that the love is real, that these young people feel as though they are connected to each other and connected to a staff and connected to a community in ways that are very deep, profound, and loving. And they see this as their extended family. And so what we've seen is a lot of the young people really holding on to the ideals. When they go off to college, they've got their mission statement and their oaths on their walls. They're walking around with their t-shirts. And the final gift that we give them as they graduate is a hoodie. And they design it themselves. Each of these t-shirts and hoodies have a quote on the back. It's got the name of their chapter. It's got their personal name on the sleeve. And it's things that they wear with pride as they walk through their community and through their lives. The last chapter activity that's new there is that the members themselves design a service project, something that they can do to give back to their school community at times or to the general community. And that's the last activity they do. So I'm going to stop there. I do have an example of an oath of dedication. This is one of our founding members, Jose Laura, who wrote many years ago. But they're beautiful testimonies. Each one of them is their own. And again, the idea here is that this is something that follows you throughout your life, and that ideally is something that serves as an anchor and a guide for you as you walk through the world. So I will stop there. End of my presentation, and looking forward to talking with everyone now. I can figure out how to stop this.
Thank you so much for that, Jason.
That was great.
Yeah, describing your history with the project, your inspiration for starting, the illustrative quotes that you provided. It gave us stark reality of the situation and the context, but it also gave just as much hope and promise. So thank you for sharing that. I'd like to turn it over now to my colleague Ahmad to kick us off for the question and answer period.
Thank you, Nikifa, and thank you, Jason, again. That was very profound. So at this time, we're just going to open up the floor for anyone who has any questions. Please put them in the chat, or you can add them to the Q&A box. So, Jason, we're going to start off just asking you a few questions that we have in our Q&A box. So looking back to when you first founded the organization, what did you wish you knew then that you know now?
It's an interesting question. What do I wish I knew then that I know now? I mean, I think one of the things that we've had to learn over the years is that when you are a very small organization with a tight-knit group of people, you function in one way, and when you are we're not a large organization, but we're mid-sized, right? 47 staff, more or less. Culture shifts, right? And even with this big building, we started out, we had a small brownstone. We were all tied up in there. Now we've got a 22,000 square foot facility. And I think, in the process of always trying to dream and wanting to have something bigger and more space and able to influence and connect with more kids, you know, there are a lot of things you have to think about in terms of culture, and how does that shift, you know, the culture of an organization as you grow. So I think those are, you know, some of the less, you know, really, we've been intentional, but I think, you know, in the process, there's so many pressures and there's so much, you know, to raise all the funding to get this all done, doesn't always give you time to step back and, you know, just reflect on things in some way. So we've had to, you know, learn a lot as we've grown. And I think some of those lessons around the challenges of maintaining the similar kind of culture as you grow, as you had when you were a small unit. And I'm thinking about just staff communication and programming, and you know, from big ideas to small ideas is one of the challenges that we faced. So.
Thank you for that, Jason. Is there anyone, any attendees who will have any feedback to his response? Feel free to raise your hand.
Looks like we have a question from Robin.
All right, here's a question from Robin. Thank you for your presentation. During it, you said, "You're not sheep," and speaking about the youth. Please tell us more about how young people can be leaders, find their voice, and exercise agency without being taught or prepped first.
Interesting. So, I mean, I think what we do, so for example, with this, I was talking with folks before we started the presentation. We had a group of young people who went today and actually had to present before City Council. So there were 3 of our young folks who went and presented. There was a hearing about mental health supports and increasing the funding for mental health supports at the city. And the young people wrote their own statement that was assigned to them to, you know, they didn't get assigned to it. That was part of their campaign, was to speak there, but they wrote their own statement and staff supported them by helping them to edit it, helping them to practice it before they went up on stage. And then they actually read it in front of a room of about 300 people and had an opportunity to kind of speak their truth. So we didn't write it for them, we had them write it, but we provided them with opportunities for editing as well as to practice beforehand, so that they felt kind of empowered and strong enough when they had to go up in front of 300 people to actually do so and do so well. So I think that's part of it, is, you know, trying to draw out from young people their own thoughts, their own ideas, helping them to, you know, mold that, shape that, and then providing them with opportunities to practice and then present. And then, you know, each time they get more skilled at doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the response, Jason, and thank you for the question, Robin. The next question comes from our question bank. On your website, it says that on average, your staff has 12 years of experience in youth development and 8 years of experience within BroSis. How do you attract highly experienced staff, and what is the secret to keeping them for so long?
Yeah, so, you know, I think because we've been doing this for 30 years now, you know, we're not known coast to coast, we're not known internationally, but in certain communities, we've got a really strong reputation. And so folks who are serious about the work, when they see a job announcement from us, you know, we get a lot of folks who, you know, have been involved in this or are really sincerely dedicated to it. We have a really intense interview process that folks have to go through, a series of interviews, really questioning them about their background, their experience, their desires, why they want to do this work. They have to facilitate workshops. They have to have members actually review them and give feedback around their performance. And then we ask them to make a very serious commitment. So when we hire, we ask them to make at least a 4-year commitment. We can't hold them to that. It's not a legal document, but we want them to know that this is a long-term organization, right? We're working with kids over extended periods of time. And part of the secret sauce of our work is that these young people know that year after year, they're going to have this person in their lives, and that level of stability is part of what makes this program successful. So from the outset, we're telling you, we want you here long-term, right? So if somebody's not interested in that and has other aspirations, then they're not going to get hired. Then in terms of keeping people here, I mean, I think we pay well. I think the salary is a livable salary. And if you're looking at, youth development work, which unfortunately is very underpaid in general, that's really important, right? To be able to sustain people. People have families, people need to survive in New York City, which is one of the most expensive places to live. We have an incredible benefit package that, including the vacation days and the comp days and the health care package and all of these things that we offer our staff, we operate with our staff in many of the same ways we operate with our young people in terms of providing them with the support and love. And when things are going on in their lives, really being there for them to hold them through those periods. Because, at the end of the day, when you have a staff that come from the same background as the kids, they're going through a lot in their own families, right? They come from the experience of poverty, right? They come from the experience of the kinds of issues that we see in our community, right? We all do. I shouldn't say just they. And so it's important for us to be supportive of our staff in similar ways that we're supportive of our young people. So that's another reason why I think they stay. There's a family atmosphere here that you won't find at most organizations.
Thank you for that, Jason. And this actually leads us to our next question, given that you brought up family. Actually, you know what? We'll hold that question off a little bit. We have a question in the chat from Larry Leverett. Any thoughts about how to build capacity of teachers, schools, and leaders to design and implement what you have learned in BroSis and the entrenched system of public education?
Yeah, so I think I can combine that answer with, it looks like Charles asked the question about ROP programs in other cities and what does that look like? So, we operate in several different ways. We have ROP, rites of passage chapters that we facilitate. So our staff go into the schools and actually facilitate these brotherhoods and sisterhoods ourselves. We have other partnerships where we train people to do the work and they facilitate the chapters, and we just provide coaching and we provide curriculum support. And then we have entire schools that have incorporated our model into the school. And so, what I ultimately think is that model of creating the necessary support systems within the school, so that it doesn't have to be an outside organization coming in and doing that, is the way to go. Schools need to have expanded youth development teams to be able to provide the social emotional supports, the other kinds of resources that our organization provides to schools, because schools can't provide it for themselves. The problem is there's no funding for that, right? So how do schools hire enough what we call youth development support to be able to implement these kind of programs? And one of the models that I've seen that actually is really interesting is the community schools model. And here in New York, there are about 100 community schools. And what this is that it's a partnership between a nonprofit and a school, where the nonprofit provides a lot of youth development supports to the students and the families in that school. And usually it's about 6 or 7 staff from the nonprofit that are then partnered in full-time staff at this particular school. So we've been training folks in some of those community schools to implement the work, and those I think are where we've seen more success. The problem with the way the community schools are set up now in New York City is that there is no uniformity, so every single community school, and there are hundreds of them, does their own thing, whatever they want to do. And so some of them are really successful and some of them are not successful at all. And so, one of the issues that I've, constantly kind of reiterating is that DOE, the Department of Education, foundations, the youth development world is constantly trying to reinvent itself. What's the new thing? But there are organizations, and mine is just one of them, that have been doing this work for decades and doing it well. So why not replicate what's already being doing well, as opposed to always trying to reinvent the wheel? So I know that's a long-winded way of kind of saying that there are possibilities out there, and our partnerships, when we're working with folks who have the capacity, because that's the real challenge, is this work that we're doing, it can't be something that you're just doing 1 hour a week. And then, in some of these schools, they try to have a math teacher do this. And yes, there's some math teachers who can switch hats and be a rites of passage program facilitator. But if your job and your principal is saying your focus needs to be math class, then how much time do you actually have to really prep and to work with and to support the kids in the rites of passage? And so what we see is at times people being pulled in different directions and not being able to give the full supports that are needed to make this kind of programming work well. Folks have to really have this be the primary thing that they're doing, along with whatever responsibilities they may have.
I actually had a question, Amon. You mentioned earlier in your story how when you came back from college, you lived at home, you had teachers from your old schools that helped set up the 2 original shops. What is there anything, well, the bigger question is, what's the role of community, lay people, not elites or government officials or philanthropists? What's the role of community in sort of the early stages of ramping up a program like this for folks that are interested in starting something in their community? And what do you wish you had more support of from regular community members that you knew, or friends, or in your network? Is there anything that was missing that could have been an ask or a compliment to your work?
I mean, in the early days, we were 2 young adults who were unknown. We didn't have a real history of doing this work. And so one of the first things that was really important for us was to have some resources and connections to people who could support our vision, right? And so, yes, that came from my old, the principal of my old high school, teachers of mine who had started other schools, who believed in what we were doing, who knew who I was, and who were willing to open the door and say, yeah, please come work with our kids. Again, this was the early 90s. So this was a time period where, people were, the philanthropic world goes through these phases. And this was one of the phases where what's going on with Black men? Like that was the big, to do at that point in time. And so the fact that we were young, Black, and coming out of an Ivy League institution opened some doors, but then having these folks who were in critical positions who could support us was another. We had a lot of folks who came in and did workshops with us, right? So, we had folks who were writers who came in and did a writing workshop. We had folks who were in particular careers and they could come and talk about the work that they do. We had folks who had access to other kinds of resources. So we needed to, for example, go on a trip and we needed a bus. Somebody paid for the bus. Like, we had to, be scrappy in the early days because we didn't have funding. But we had friends and, resources who knew what we were doing and were finding ways to support us, volunteering in different ways. That was really important in the early days. And when we created our board, many of whom were just lay people who, we knew had our best interests at heart. And this is one of the interesting things about creating a nonprofit, is that we as founders, started this work. But once we created a board, the board then sits above us, right? And ultimately, the board can fire you, right? So we had to put people on the board, but we had to put people who we trusted, but also who we knew saw eye to eye with us, right? Because we knew that the direction we wanted to head in, and we knew that there were people who might not agree with us or agree with our approach. And then we also wanted people who had connection to some kind of resources, whether that was financial resources or other kinds of opportunities to support us as young folks. So I guess, to get back to the essence of your question, it was critical to be able to have the support of people who, one, had some name recognition. This is back in the day also where you used to have letterhead and you'd have a list of all the people who were on your board on your letterhead. So coming from Jason or Kari, people are like, who are these people? But then having some people's names who are known on our letterhead, suddenly it's like, okay, well, if this person's on the board, then they must be doing something right? So that was really important to us in the early days. And yeah, having I remember our first fundraiser, which I think, I don't know, we might have raised $20,000, but like having people come together, cook the food, you know, like help with the decoration, like all those kind of things that you know, need support with when you are just a scrappy grassroots kind of program. We had a lot of that. And what was fortunate was that I had worked in nonprofits before. And so I had some background in the whole fundraising scheme. And I say scheme, but, you know, essentially having to write a proposal and get money for that. And I was like, wow, I remember when I wrote my first proposal and I was like, I got $50,000 and I had to write an essay. Okay, I can write essays. I can do this, you know, like, and so building out our organization in that way, you know, after our first or second year, we then actually started to get grants and, you know, we were able to start, you know, building out things in that way. But yeah, having supports of various kinds from the outset was really important.
Thank you for your response, Jason, and thank you for the question, Nakifa. At this time, actually, Jason, you did answer all of our questions in the question bank. So we'll just open the floor for anyone who has any questions. Please feel free to raise your hand, add it in the chat, or add it in the Q&A option.
I see someone asked a question, I guess it was Charles earlier also, why do you have young people in single sex cohorts? And this is an interesting question because it's one, you know, I think especially nowadays that we've gotten some pushback around and some questioning around. I think especially in the last, I don't know, I'd say 5 to 10 years, right? There has been an explosion of gender expansive young people. And gender expansive folk have always been here, right? So this is nothing new, but fortunately, our society is now much more accepting, and young people are much more loud, you know, about their identity and their gender identity. And so we've gotten a lot of questions about, you know, again, why do you do separate gender programming? You know, how do you deal with young people who don't necessarily fall in one category or the other, identify in that way? And what I have said about that is that, you know, within our organization now, as I showed you, we have 6 programs. 5 of those programs have no gender separation whatsoever, serve everybody, is open to everyone. One of those programs, our Rites of Passage program, provides what we call an intentional community, or what in some place might be considered affinity groups for young men or young women. And so because we are able to provide programming for kids from 8 through 22, regardless, all of our other programming is open to everyone, we feel like, you know what, it's not a problem to have these separate gender groups because we can also serve young people in all other ways, right? And within those separate gender groups, if you identify as a male, you can be in a brotherhood. If you identify as a female, you can be in a sisterhood. So that's the only requirement. And why is it important is that there are certain conversations that happen when young boys are together that wouldn't happen in the same way if there were girls in the room, and vice versa. That we've seen that there's a different, that approach for us has enabled us to have certain kinds of conversations and to get really open with young women or with young men about the realities of their lives in ways that are extremely beneficial. And so, you know, that's kind of why for us it's really critical in terms of their development over time. But again, really important to recognize that I would feel very uncomfortable if that's all we were doing. But because we have all of these other programs that young folks who don't necessarily want to fit in one side of the binary or the other can still access, then it's, I feel like it's okay within an organization that serves 600 kids to have those kind of program of diversity of programming in that way.
All right, thank you, Jason. Again, thank you for all of your responses. We have another question from Robin Ince. I love this model. Just wondering, has BroSis extended or considered offering training to higher education institutions and or to college students who are not BroSis alumni?
Yeah, we have a whole professional development wing. And so we are doing trainings across the country and internationally for folks on our model. We have not done, or we're not affiliated at this point with the university, but we have trained, hundreds of folks from different organizations across the country over the last 25 years or so. And if there's any interest, I'd be happy. I'd be the person to reach out to. I conduct most of those trainings to partner with the university and to do trainings with young folks. We're always thinking about this pipeline question, right? Of how do you bring more young people into this kind of work? And I think, unfortunately, within education schools across the country, they're not always doing a great job also with helping folks to understand the realities of working with urban youth, youth of color, underserved, economically disadvantaged youth. And so a lot of what we do in our trainings is really helping folks to understand the perspective of the population that we are most focused on: Black and Latinx, young folks, inner city environments, underserved, economically disadvantaged, et cetera. But not to make it all deficit model, right? Extremely bright, extremely powerful, but just needing the support and the guidance that unfortunately is denied them.
All right. Thank you so much, Jason, for that response. And thank you, Robin, for your question. So at this time, Charles, I believe we'll take one more final question. And if there are no more questions, I will kick it to Charles to close us out for tonight, sorry. All right, Charles, that seems to be all of the questions for tonight.
Okay, that's fine. It was remarkable, just everything we asked for. Before we close out, just a couple of pieces of business. Okaikor, if I think you're still here, if you don't mind, could you just tell folk just a couple of words about the Free Mind, Free People conference coming up next year, which I think will allow us to revisit some of the same things. You have to unmute.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Charles. And hi, Jason. It's great to I heard you mention a very familiar name, Susan Wilcox, who is part of our network too as well, and someone that we adore deeply here with EdLive. So I'm Okaikor Ayi Price, the executive director for the Education for Liberation Network. And we'll be holding our Free Minds, Free People conference. It's a conference that we've been hosting since 2007 under the leadership of Susan Wilcox, Tara Mack, and a few others who helped organize and put it together. Education for Liberation Network was a space that was kind of created out of the organizing work and leadership of Charles and so many other academics like Lisa Delpit, Teresa Perry, so many others help form the space. But Free Minds, Free People will be in Newark in 2024, local. So, and it's going to be July 12th through the 14th. July 12th happens to be the 56th anniversary of the Newark Uprising too as well. And so we're looking forward to being in community with folks and having multiple conversations around what it means for us to kind of get the kind of liberation that we need, and using education as a tool for that. And we are a radical revolutionary space that is super grassroots and hella fun and really principled in the work that we want to do. And so if you're interested, please come to our website. We're edliberation.org. You can send me an email. I can put my email in the chat too as well if you want more information. But we're right now getting ready for our retreat and we'll be planning all year. So looking forward to it. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Okaikor. And obviously, I wanted you to do that because it's another group of folk grappling with the same questions. And I got a lot of things I need to talk to Jason about, but one of them is perhaps raising some of the same issues in the context of the conference next year. Another one is having a visit at some point from your newfound friends in New Jersey, because I think there are going to be a lot of folk who would love to do that if you guys can accommodate. More immediately, in terms of the Freedom School project, I wanted to say that this is probably our last presentation for this academic year. We are actually in conversation with a Freedom School in Nairobi, Kenya. If we can hook that up in the next couple of weeks, the logistics are slightly complicated, then we will do that. But other than that, I think our main task over the summer would be good to go back to the conversation that a number of us have been in at previous times about forming working groups around certain themes. And I don't have them all in front of me, but I know one of them was about starting and expanding programs. One of them was about finding and disseminating curriculum. One of them about teacher pipeline. So we'll go back over all of those discussions, and we will get back to you to see who is interested in what and how we can make those connections. And all I'm going to say about tonight's presentation is just that I think it almost has to expand one's mind, right? I mean, stuff is not only possible, it is happening at scale and in depth right across the river for those of us who in Jersey. I don't think people understand the power of this kind of model, and they are demonstrating that power on a daily basis. This talk touched on the political, the intellectual, and the spiritual, and I think that's the power of the work that they are doing. And so I echo Larry. Thank all of you who have been a part of making this happen, for what you're doing for young people, also what you're doing for us to help us learn about the limits of possibilities. Thank you all. And with that, we'll say good night. All right. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you for having me.
It was a
Looking forward to
pleasure.
continuing to connect.